Chapter 14. Child of Shadows. Sunny had no choice but to resort to one last, desperate gamble. He had no chance against the enemy in a direct confrontation. At least not without an advantage. Bloodbane poison was supposed to be his hidden card, but turned out to be nearly useless. Being able to see in the dark did not help that much too. Somehow, Hero was able to perceive their surroundings even without any light. Whether he was using his sense of hearing or some magical ability, Sunny did not know. Not that it mattered now that they had left the cave and were standing under the moonlit sky. Now he had only one advantage left. The fact that he knew that the tyrant was blind and Hero did not. Acting on that knowledge, however, was easier said than done. But what else could he do? That's why he tried to stay as quiet as possible and rang the silver bell. If the description did not lie, its ringing could be heard from miles away. Surely the tyrant was going to hear it too. Now, Sunny only had to stay silent, stall for time, and hope that the monster would come. As he did so, Hero's bewilderment slowly turned into anger. "Tell me right now or you will regret it." His voice was quite threatening, but still, the young slave did not answer. He just shivered in the cold and tried not to groan despite the pulsing pain in his chest. "Why are you not answering?" But Sunny did not dare to answer. He held his breath and watched, horrified, as the familiar colossal figure appeared behind Hero. His lungs were on fire, and his heart was beating like crazy. It was beating so loud that he was even afraid that the blind tyrant would hear it. But of course, it couldn't be louder than Hero's voice, who was still talking, turning himself into the only source of noise on this mountain. At the last second, a hint of understanding appeared in the young soldier's eyes. He began to turn around, his sword rising with lightning speed. But it was too late. A massive hand appeared from the darkness and caught him into an iron grip. The bone claws scraped against the armor, pulling it apart. Mountain King dragged Hero back, paying little attention to the sword biting into its wrist. Viscous saliva was streaming from its opened maw. Petrified by fear, Sunny slowly turned his back to them and took a couple of steps up the old, winding path. Then he darted away, running as fast as he could. Behind him, a desperate scream tore apart the silent night. Then a hungry roar followed. It seemed that Hero wasn't going down without a fight, even though his fate was already sealed. But Sunny didn't care. He was running away, climbing higher and higher. "I'm sorry, Hero," he thought. "I did say that I will watch you die. But as you know, I am a liar. So go and die on your own." A lonesome dark mountain stood tall against the raging winds. Jagged and proud, it dwarfed other peaks of the mountain chain, cutting the night sky with its sharp edges. A radiant moon bathed its slopes in the ghostly light. Under that light, a young man with pale skin and black hair reached the peak of the mountain. However, his looks didn't match the magnificence of the scene. Wounded and staggering, he looked pathetic and weak. The young man looked like a walking corpse. His coarse tunic and cloak were torn and smeared with blood. His sunken eyes were cloudy and lifeless. His body was bruised, beaten, and cut. There were specks of bloody foam on his legs. He was hunched over, cradling the left side of his chest. Each step caused him to moan, ragged breath barely escaping from gritted teeth. But most of all, he was cold. So cold. He just wanted to lie down in the snow and fall asleep. But instead, he continued walking, because he believed that the nightmare will be over once he reaches the peak. Step, step, another step. Finally, he had made it. At the highest point of the mountain, a vast expanse of flat rock was covered with snow. In the center of it, illuminated by moonlight, stood a magnificent temple. Its colossal columns and walls were cut from black marble, with exquisite reliefs decorating the Stygian pediment and broad frieze. Beautiful and awesome, it looked like a palace of a dark god. At least it did once. Now, the temple was in ruins. Fractures and cracks marred the black stones. Parts of the roof had collapsed, letting in ice and snow. Its tall gates were broken, as if smashed into pieces by a hand of a giant. Still, Sunny was satisfied. "Found you," he said in a hoarse voice. Gathering the last of his strength, the young slave slowly limped in the direction of the ruined temple. His thoughts were muddled and confused. "See this, Hero?" he thought, forgetting for a second that Hero was already dead. "I've made it. You were strong and ruthless, and I was weak and timid. Yet now you are a corpse, and I am still alive. Isn't it funny? He stumbled and groaned, feeling the edges of his broken ribs cutting deeper into his lungs. Blood was dripping from his mouth. Dead or not, Hero had gotten him good with that single strike. Actually, it's not. What do any of you even know about being ruthless? Poor fools. In the world where I come from, people had thousands of years to turn cruelty into an art. And as someone on the receiving end of all that cruelty, don't you think I would know more about being vicious than you ever could? He was getting closer to the temple. Truth be told, you never stood a chance. Wait, what was I thinking about? A moment later, he had already forgotten. There was only pain, the dark temple, and the overpowering desire to sleep. Don't fall for it. It's just hypothermia. If you fall asleep, you'll die. Finally, Sunny reached the steps of the Black Temple. He started to climb them, not noticing thousands of bones that were scattered around. These bones once belonged to humans and monsters both. All of them were killed by the invisible guardians still lingering around the temple. As Sunny was climbing the steps, one of the shapeless guardians approached him. It was ready to snuff out the spark of life that was burning weakly in the defiler's chest, but then stopped, sensing a faint, strangely familiar scent coming from his soul. The scent of divinity. Sorrowful and lonesome, the guardian moved aside, letting Sunny pass. Oblivious, he entered the temple. Sunny found himself in a grandiose hall. Cascades of moonlight were falling through the holes in the partially collapsed roof. Deep shadows were surrounding these circles of silver light, not daring to touch them. The floor was covered in snow and ice. At the far end of the hall, a large altar was cut from a single piece of black marble. It was the only thing inside the temple untouched by snow. Forgetting why he came here, Sunny headed for the altar. He just wanted to sleep. The altar was dry, clean, and as wide as a bed. Sunny climbed on it and lay down. It seemed like he was going to die. He was okay with it. Sunny tried to close his eyes, but was stopped by a sudden noise coming from the direction of the temple's entrance. He turned his head to look. What he saw would have sent chills running down his spine if he wasn't so cold, tired, and indifferent. Mountain King was standing there, looking at him, with its 5 blind eyes. He was still massive, terrifying, and revolting. Worm-like shapes were still moving frantically under its skin. It was sniffing the air, salivating. Then it opened its maw and moved forward, slowly approaching the altar. What an ugly bastard, Sunny thought, and suddenly clutched his chest, convulsing in a fit of torturous coughing. Bloody foam flew from his mouth and fell on the altar. However, the black marble soon absorbed it. A second later, it was as pristine as it was before. The tyrant was just about to reach Sunny. It was already stretching its hands to grab him. I guess this is the end, he thought, resigned to his fate. But at the last second, suddenly, the voice of the spell resounded in the dark temple. You have offered yourself as a sacrifice to the gods. The gods are dead and cannot hear you. Your soul bears the mark of divinity. You are a temple slave. Shadow God stirs in his eternal slumber. He sends a blessing from beyond the grave. Child of shadows, receive your blessing. Under Sunny's astonished eyes, the shadows crowding the great hall suddenly moved, as though coming alive. Tentacles of darkness surged forward, entangling Mountain King's arms and legs. The mighty tyrant struggled, trying to get free. But how could it resist the power of a god? The shadows dragged Mountain King back, pulling in different directions. The tyrant opened its maw, and a furious howl escaped it. The next second, its body ruptured, torn apart into pieces. Blood, viscera, and severed limbs fell on the floor in a crimson torrent. Just like that, the horrible creature was dead. Sunny blinked. Once again he was alone in the ruined temple. The great hall was dark and silent. And then the spell whispered, "You have slain an awakened tyrant, Mountain King. Wake up, Sunless. Your nightmare is over." Chapter 15. Shadow Slave. Prepare for appraisal. Sunny found himself in a space between dream and reality. It was an endless black void, illuminated by a myriad of stars. Between those stars, countless strings of silver light were woven into a beautiful and inconceivably complex net, forming various nexuses and constellations. It was truly breathtaking. Somehow, Sunny understood that he was seeing the inner workings of the Nightmare spell. He also couldn't help but think, that it looked a lot like the celestial equivalent of a neural network. If so, was the spell alive? This was a question that countless people had been asking themselves for the past few decades. The best answer they had come up with was that there was no way to know. The spell was neither alive nor dead, neither sentient nor mindless. It was more of a function than a creature. But Sonny was in no mood to ponder philosophical questions. He was eagerly awaiting his boon. The spell was still appraising his performance. However, the first reward had nothing to do with it. You have received a memory. Puppeteer's Shroud. Yes! Sonny felt incredibly elated. He was almost ready to do a happy dance. That memory belonged to Mountain King, who was an awakened tyrant, which meant that the memory itself was of the awakened rank. Getting it was a stroke of incredible luck. There were 7 ranks to everything in the spell. These ranks were, in order of growing power: Dormant, Awakened, Ascended, Transcendent, Supreme, Sacred, and Divine, with the exclusion of nightmare creatures who were ranked as Dormant, Awakened, Fallen, Corrupted, Great, Cursed, and Unholy. From the spell's point of view, Sonny was a dormant human. Having a memory of a higher rank than his own soul core would be of great help once he enters the dream realm. The power gap between different ranks simply could not be overestimated. He wanted to take a look at the Puppeteer's Shroud, but there was no more time. The spell was done with its appraisal. Here in the void, its voice didn't sound subtle and familiar anymore. Rather, it seemed like the universe itself was speaking. Sonny held his breath, listening. Aspirant, your trial is over. A nameless slave ascended the Black Mountain. Both heroes and monsters fell by his hand. Unbroken, he entered the ruined temple of a long-forgotten god and spilled his blood on the sacred altar. The gods were dead, and yet they listened. You have defeated a dormant beast, Mountain King's lava. You have defeated 3 dormant humans, names unknown. You have defeated an awakened human, Oro of the Nine. You have defeated an awakened tyrant, Mountain King. You have received the Shadow God's blessing. You have achieved the impossible. Final appraisal, glorious. Your treachery truly knows no bounds. That final part was not really necessary, as far as Sonny was concerned. But he was still pretty satisfied with the praise from the spell. He felt like his chances of evolving his aspect to an awakened, or even ascended one, were pretty high. His overall power was still dependent on the rank of his soul core, which would remain dormant until much later. But the rank of the aspect itself would do wonders for his overall potential. Dreamer Sunless, receive your boon. He was an aspirant no more. Sonny grinned. You have been bestowed a true name, Lost from Light. His jaw dropped. A true name. He had received a true name. Never in his wildest dreams did Sonny dream of becoming one of the chosen few to accomplish such feat. And in his very first nightmare to boot. He was an elite now. A bona fide cream of the crop. He was going to be rich, but the rewards kept coming. Your aspect is ready to evolve. Evolve aspect? What kind of a question is that? Sonny crossed his fingers and said yes. Dormant aspect temple slave is evolving. New aspect acquired. Aspect rank, divine. Sonny fell over. Aspect name, Shadow Slave. Divine. It's divine. Sonny was standing on his knees, stupefied. The shock was so great that for a second there, he lost all control over his limbs and fell. It said divine, right? He raised a trembling hand and rubbed his eyes, making sure that he was awake. Or rather conscious, since technically he was still sleeping in the underground vault of the police station. Confused by all this terminology, Sonny silently summoned the runes and found the lines describing his aspect. Aspect, Shadow Slave. Aspect rank, divine. Aspect description. You are a miraculous shadow left behind by a dead god. As a divine shadow, you possess plenty of strange and wondrous powers. However, your existence is empty and lonesome. You mourn the passing of your former master and long to find a new one. Innate ability, Shadow Bond. Ability description. Find a worthy master and let them know your true name. Once they recite it out loud, you will be bound to their will, unable to disobey any command. It is improper for a shadow, let alone a divine one, to walk around without a master. That was a lot to digest. First of all, Sonny felt his heart beating faster. He heard it right. All the suffering and horror he had experienced in the first nightmare paid off in the end. A divine aspect. He had received a divine aspect. Anything above awakened was rare and immensely valuable. people with ascended aspects were rare enough to be fought over by various factions. The factions themselves were built around singular powerhouses with transcendent or supreme aspects. And he had never ever heard of anyone acquiring a divine one. Never. Anything with the divine prefix was so hard to find that it mostly lived in the realm of myths and legends. After all, the human race had not reached that high yet. It was only slightly more than a decade since humans managed to finally conquer the third nightmare and receive the ability to evolve their cause to transcendent rank. As transcendents, or saints as they were called in the real world, powerful awakened ruled over the dream realm, but even they did not dare to face nightmare creatures of higher ranks. Subsequently, there were not a lot of memories and echoes of supreme rank around, let alone sacred or divine. The same went for aspects. And yet, Sunny just got one. He grinned, driven half mad by joy and arrogance. However, his jubilation was a little muddied. After all, there was that weird innate ability. Of course, he had no intention of becoming someone's magical slave, with no free will of his own. To hell with that. But it wasn't that bad. All he had to do to avoid that fate was to conceal his true name. No one except for him could see his status. That meant that Sunny just had to keep his mouth shut, and no one will know that he even had one. It meant giving up on all the benefits that someone who was bestowed a true name after the first nightmare was entitled to. But it all paled in comparison with a divine aspect. Not a problem, Sunny thought with a smirk. If the spell had the ability to laugh, it would surely do so after hearing his thoughts. However, it didn't. Instead, it began to speak again. The first seal is broken, awakening dormant powers.